Chapter 8, Note-Taking Study Guide, page 139. This is the overview of the entire chapter. The question is, how do reformers and writers inspire change and also spark controversy? Okay, first, we'll talk about society and education. This should all be reviewed. Societal reforms was an organized attempt to improve the conditions of life. There's two factors that encouraged this. First was the expansion of democracy, and second was religious feelings, basically the Second Great Awakening. The temperance movement was an organized effort to end alcohol abuse and problems created by it. Prison reforms by Dorothy Dix, and the creation of humane prisons, and also the creation of asylums for the mentally ill. And education reform. This was the Horace Mann called for colleges to train teachers, hire and also increase teacher salaries, and Massachusetts was the first state to admit African Americans to public schools. Some of the highlights from education reform. The next thing we're going to talk about is slavery. Abolitionists, they were reformers who wanted to abolish slavery. A couple important abolitionists were William Lloyd Garrison, who co-founded the Liberator, and Frederick Douglass, who was an escaped slave and powerful speaker. The Underground Railroad was also functioning during this time, and there was conductors. Conductors helped slaves move between stations. And Harriet Tubman, escaped slave, escorted more than 300 slaves to freedom during her lifetime. Opposition to slavery, opposition to the abolitionist movement. Northerners relied on cotton produced by the slaves, and the gag rule blocked anti-slavery petitions in Congress, and the South was able to do that. The next thing is women's rights movement. Began as a demand equal rights as citizens, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, and this was the most important one. And it did a couple things. It was a birthplace of women's suffrage, and they founded the two most important. Stanton and Anthony founded the National Women's Suffrage Association, and there was a couple of new opportunities that came about as a result of this and during this time period. First, women started schools for girls and women, and careers first in medicine, astronomy, journalism. The women were the first ones to do these specific jobs during this time period. And finally, culture. Culture changed, ideas. First, there's a couple ideas. Transcendentalism was a form of romanticism, a European artistic movement. The writings of Emerson and Thoreau reflected this kind of idea that humans could transcend their problems. Lewis May Alcott was the first to depict women as a believable, imperfect person rather than a shining ideal. And finally, American artists began to focus on landscapes around them and the daily lives of Americans. So we start moving into kind of the realist movements.